Brussels Bytes, a podcast about technology, digital society, and European policy. Brought to you by the Martin Center with Dimitar Lilkov.
Hi friends! As we start another podcast episode, I just want to share a word of thanks to all of you for your interest and support. We started Brussels Bytes 3 years ago, and I'm extremely happy that through highs and lows, through pandemics and political drama, we're continuing our series with some of the most interesting experts of the world of technology and European policy. Thank you for being part of this fantastic experience. Speaking of interesting guests, today we are happy to host a great guest from the Mediterranean. Vagelis Papakonstantinou is a professor of law in the Free University of Brussels, focusing on data protection, cybersecurity, and the broader topic of the regulation of technology. Currently, he is also the data protection officer, or DPO, of the leading political party in Greece, Nea Demokratia. Vagelis, thank you very much for joining us.
Dimitar, thank you very much for the invitation. Thank you very much for having me. I certainly hope I can live up to the high expectations of your kind introduction and looking very much forward to this.
Of course. Now, Vagelis, it's been a while since we had the pleasure of hosting an academic, and given that you are involved with some of the most interesting topics of today, cybersecurity, data protection, tell us a bit of your life as a professor and about your life with engaging with young students on some of these, cutting-edge topics.
Yes, this can be a double-edged sword because it is interesting, but at the same time it is challenging. Simply in order to keep up with everything that's been taking place the past few years in the field of regulation of technologies, digital technology, so to say, is a tremendous task, merely to map the field. And even if you wish to go deeper and be productive academically, in a sense, it is even more difficult. However, challenges are always welcome and accepted. And of course, the connection with the younger generation, to which this is not entirely new, is most welcome and pleasant.
How are your students responding to all of these topics? Data protection, cybersecurity. Are they concerned? Are they engaged?
It is, of course, they are concerned and engaged. Everybody is at the end of the day. However, it is an entirely different perspective because younger generations are practically born into the digital. Whereas for my generation, I'm in my late 40s now, so. And I was not born into the digital. The digital came and found me midlife. And I had to somehow adapt and still have to try to keep up. Whereas for the younger generation, it is self-evident that there is the digital around them.
We spoke a bit before in our conversation about the digital effect, and I really like the phrase you used, the normalization of the internet. What exactly do you mean by this, and how do we tie it with today's generation?
Yes, today's generation will never understand how things came to be, but to older people like me, it has been a tremendous change because the first age of the internet, let's say the 90s, it was a completely different thing that revolutionized a great many industries. It brought down the music industry. It brought down the film industry, or at least threatened to bring down, and most certainly brought down the business model. And now it threatens to break down the press industry. However, first victims have been normalized because at first the traditional business model of music production and dissemination was broken, but now it is fixed through subscription services. Mm-hmm. The same with the film industry. So it's gradually being normalized, and the same, I think, will soon happen with the press industry because right now it's under a crisis, but I think soon we will enter subscription services, closed walls, etc. So I think that the internet came up as something completely new and entirely evolutionary, but now is being settled into the norms that humanity already knew before the internet came. But it's a process.
But were we prepared for this change, given the repercussions we've seen online, the problems we've seen online, the fragmentation we've seen online? Now it's it's a new normal, of course, but it seems as if that all of this change kind of came to us, but we're not fully prepared. And here I'm hinting at data protection, for example, and privacy, for example.
Yes, you can never be prepared for change, otherwise it would not have been change. And these are perhaps necessary steps: disruption, distraction, unavoidably, and then rebuilding. So I think it's a normal life process. But yes, privacy and data protection law are technologically, they have their origins in technology. They develop through technology, and for the moment, at least formally, it is our only response. Humanity's only response, not only Europe's only response, to technology. But this will soon change.
Speaking of which, by the way, this month it's 4 years since the General Data Protection Regulation, or the GDPR, came into effect. There was a lot of expectation, a lot of worries, a lot of hype surrounding it in 2018. I remember that the Martin Center was also engaged in discussing all of these issues. 4 years later, where do we stand when it comes to data protection in Europe? And has this been a successful process, or we're still figuring it out?
No, to me it has been a success story, absolutely. To me it's cause for celebration, this anniversary. And for Europe, externally, it has set the global paradigm for regulation, not only of personal data processing, but of technology in general. All over the globe, the industry's response, even in the US, each time a new technology is released, be it bio, be it self-driving cars, be it drones, AI, whatever, is time and again the GDPR principles, specifically referring, even the Americans, to the GDPR principles. Beyond that, China only recently released personal data protection law that has been explicitly, again, by the Chinese words, influenced by the GDPR. The same has been the case with Brazil, India, and many other countries on the planet. Therefore, I think that for European purposes, external European purposes, this has been an absolute success. Internally, we can discuss for hours if implementation has been successful or not. Enforcement could be better, could have been improved. This is an open issue. But again, to cut it short, I am positive. I think that, yes, it is a successful example.
The thing is that exactly implementation has been an issue, especially when we talk about data protection administrations across the EU, and the fact that there are still bottlenecks of large-scale, big cases against certain companies which are still unresolved. And I think that this is the biggest challenge in the future. It's not that the rules of GDPR are not proper, but when it comes to national administrations, we've seen bottlenecks. Now, when I introduced you, I mentioned that you are a DPO, or data protection officer, which is an extremely interesting position. By the way, you are one of the very few DPOs I've actually met. And I remember back in 2018 when the GDPR was being enforced, all of these companies and big companies had to rush to find DPOs. Now, you are a data protection officer of a political party in Greece. Maybe it will be interesting for our audience to share what exactly does this entail, and what's your everyday life being a DPO?
This is exactly the challenge, the political party. Because, of course, following the GDPR requirements, a lot of organizations need to incorporate into their structure DPO, the position of the DPO. To some it is new, to some it is an old news. However, a political party is different to any other organization because, in principle, an organization does not process data as the main course of its activities. It can be an industry, an enterprise that provides a service, sells a product, and then in that course of action, it processes data of its clients, of its suppliers, for the purposes, very specific purposes of carrying out its business. This is not the case with the political party, because the political party, by definition, only processes data as its own purpose of processing data for electoral success, obviously, at the end of the day. Therefore, personal data are embedded in a political party, whereas this is not the case in any other industry. So it's extremely interesting. New challenges come up every day. A political party does not become alive only during election periods, but also in the in-between. Although citizen individuals not voting may not perceive often a political party as alive and breathing during the intermediate period, this is not the case. There are internal elections, reshuffling, so it's always interesting.
One of the biggest criticisms of GDPR to date has been that this is extra red tape, extra costs for companies. And for example, exactly the DPO position was attacked throughout the years, basically saying that why is Brussels making us open up new positions and allocate resources for DPOs? How would you respond to this criticism?
That in short, this is the cost of doing business in Europe. And there is a competitive advantage in doing business in Europe, not only because of the market, but because of the name Europe has outside Europe. And this is the cost of doing business. And cost will only increase.
And how are other international partners globally responding to this? What's your position? You mentioned that we're influencing other countries, but
yes.
Are we actually influencing them in substance, or?
Absolutely. This is the well-described phenomenon, the Brussels effect. There is rich bibliography in this regard, also in other fields of law. I think it's predominantly the case in the regulation of digital technologies. The GDPR is a precursor of things to come. However, please also consider that right now there are at least 5 or 6 other eponymous European acts, the DGA, DMA, DSA, the AI Act, the Data Act, we wait for the Data Resilience Act, that will be released, are unique again on the planet in their subject matter and scope, and are expected to further the Brussels effect even to a larger extent outside Europe. So if you ask me, this is perhaps popular, but to me, in a three-polar world where the US owns technology and China owns money, Europe owns regulation.
Oh, yeah, just to jump in, the Brussels effect you just mentioned, this has been coined as a term by the academic Arno Bradford. And just to clarify for our audience, this is the premise that through its soft power, through its supranational legislation, actually Brussels and the EU is influencing the rest of the international community. And this is a positive spillover, which makes sure that Brussels actually establishes its own standards internationally. I'm very optimistic about this term, and I'm very hopeful about these processes. Now, the thing is here, as a point of either criticism or rebuttal to what you just said, is, okay, but is this the only thing the EU is going to own, regulation? Does it mean that we'll forever, lag behind when it comes to access to talent, to funding, to the, innovation, breakthrough technology and all that?
Yeah, I'm a lawyer, so I may be accused of self-serving purposes, but I think it is more than enough. I think providing regulation and policy and theory to the planet is more than enough for a role of a single region. It is extremely important. There are positive side effects to be taken advantage of, but I will not go into that in any more detail. And I think, yes, this is Europe's contribution, and I also think that this is potential Europe's contribution, because, quite frankly, I do not see Europe competing at a level of technology found elsewhere, not in the sense that we cannot, but in the sense of the size of the market. Because this cannot be achieved, startups in China or the US have an immediate user base of several hundreds, thousands of users simply by starting up, whereas in Europe, by definition, fragmentation of language, this is simply not possible. Therefore, we will never reach that critical size of the market necessary to develop technology, and to the same end, the critical size of economy itself. But this, of course, is my own thought. And again, in a self-serving manner, I think that offering regulation to the planet is more than enough as a role for Europe, and we should take advantage of that.
Also, given that even though we have a smaller market than let's say China, when it comes to wealth, when it comes to GDP, we can leverage exactly this size, and I think this is a very important avenue. Now, the things you mentioned about privacy are extremely interesting, but this also brings me to the other topic we want to discuss on cybersecurity, which is another field of your expertise. Are you that optimistic on cybersecurity as much as you're optimistic about data protection and the role the EU has had in the last couple of years?
I am. However, there is no go-to legal instrument, same as the GDPR in the field of cybersecurity. We have, of course, the NIS directive, currently discussing NIS2, and a couple of other complementary regulatory tools. However, I remain optimistic. We still need the go-to instrument. And this cannot be the Cybersecurity Act, but still, this is an internal discussion. We still need the basic text of reference that I hope will come. However, I am optimistic because Europe is again the first to start formulating the legal response to cybersecurity. And this is important because until recently, inside and outside Europe, cybersecurity has been a technical, an issue for engineers mostly, less for policymakers and lawyers. But this is changing, and I'm happy to note the change first happening again in Europe.
The thing is that, indeed, it's a technical issue, and it's something which usually is in the remit of digital companies or businesses, and people rely on these external providers for ensuring their cybersecurity. However, do you see such a strong supranational framework being developed in Europe, given that right now, I mean, we see cyber attacks happening on a daily basis, we see them becoming even more elaborate, and to be honest, people's culture, when it comes to digital hygiene, if I may use this term, there's more to be desired, no?
Yes, absolutely. The problem, but this is to me, of European policy on cybersecurity is that I think it is too much state and organizations relevant, leaving the people outside of the picture. I think that maybe a rethinking of the whole approach is necessary to bring the people back in the picture. Because if you consider security on the streets, then it is also a matter of individuals. There is a right to security. How come suddenly, when we start talking about cybersecurity, it only becomes a matter of the state and of large organizations? There's something, to me at least, wrong there. So I think a change of perspective is necessary. However, the good thing is that, again, in Europe, we have started discussing this.
How do you bring the individual in this process, though? Is it through education? Is it through specific inclusion? Is it through specific means?
I would propose, at the end of the day, a special right to cybersecurity, individual right. But even if we do not go that far, still, yes, education, a whole culture, in the very same manner that a whole culture on data privacy has been developed through the GDPR, but also earlier than that. In the same manner, cybersecurity should become a concern of every European individually, not as an expectation of the state or his or her employer to provide, but rather of ourselves.
Now, it gets really tricky here, because one might argue that even member states, national capitals, and specifically security services across the EU have a vested interest in making sure that you can tap into people's user data or you can snoop on conversations. And here, by the way, I'm referring to the Pegasus case. I'm sure that you're aware. And just for a quick refresher on this, in the last couple of years, we've seen really abysmal cybersecurity breaches by a certain company, NSO, which provides and sells software to enforcement agencies, to government agencies, and even maybe private entities. And this type of software can basically crack exploits in iPhones, exploits in Android devices, and through an extremely elaborate process, make sure that your conversations or your communication is being recorded, and you have no idea about this happening. It's not about a phishing email or something you actually clicked. It's a zero-click software which just starts operating through an upgrade or a software exploit. And we've seen there's been an amazing investigation by Citizen Lab, and we've seen how this is used against dissidents, active politicians, and it goes through to the very top of the European political elite. So are actually all of these actors incentivized to close all of these loopholes, or will forever be stuck in this recurring threat of such breaches?
Yes, spyware. The spyware issue is a well-discussed issue these days. But let me please take a step back, because the main problem with cybersecurity is lack of clarity as a term. And let me please explain this. If we talk about security, the known security on the streets, then there is the right to security, individual security, there is national security, there is public order, security agencies. So there are many terms to describe the many aspects of a single thing, security. How come then when we talk about cybersecurity, everything falls under the same term? Because cybersecurity is the same thing as me losing my password, I don't know, somebody accessing my email. At the same time, cybersecurity is used for spyware, which in principle is secret services snooping on people of interest. So, but we cannot keep having the same term to cover everything, because we lose track of what is happening. So if we wanted to focus on spyware as part of cybersecurity, then yes, this is something unregulated, of course, as such. However, again, please consider that in the real world, it is not unheard of for secret services to keep an eye on persons of interest, be it by physical means on the streets or electronically. This is not unheard of. In democratic societies, we have procedures for that. And at some point or another, spyware will have to enter these procedures. It has not yet done so, as I understand it, as I read also in the press, but it will happen sooner or later. But again, this is a completely different thing. Cybersecurity as national security, and cybersecurity as an individual issue of me losing my email account.
This is a great point, actually, that there is no democratic process and no democratic oversight on these processes, even if they're led by security agencies. And this is something we've struggled in the last decade, that these things are happening, but there's no actual procedure so that our societies can know that this is happening in a transparent way. But I agree with your point about differentiating between the two. Now, you come from Greece, and I'm just curious, because usually in our podcast we talk about the supranational aspects and Brussels this, Brussels that. What's your impression of Greece on the national level when we talk about cybersecurity? And maybe in more general terms, are national capitals in the EU, I mean, your personal impression, how are they tackling this issue and how can this be improved?
Good question. Let me please first remind you that the NIS directive came out in 2016, so only 5 years ago. And it was the first time that national capitals were obliged to produce a national strategy. Many of them, I do not want to refer specifically to Greece, did not have any. So they were forced to produce for the first time, although cybersecurity as an issue was obviously known to politicians for at least a decade before 2016, but still at that time, national capitals had to create and publish a strategy and then take specific measures for cybersecurity. For many among them, it was a first. So I think that the Brussels effect on national level is positive because it forces people to do things, be it politicians, be it governments, be it organizations. Still, there is and from power from above to force you to do things that otherwise might go under the routine way of. So it is a positive effect. And I also think, and this is a different approach that is applicable to cybersecurity, but also to other digital technologies, that it is good for Europe, for Brussels, to be putting the first paper on the table on how regulation should be done, rather than vice versa, because these are topics that are better treated horizontally, so to say, at EU level, rather than first individually and then trying to converge.
Now, the question here is whether the Brussels effect is going to spill over international on cybersecurity as well, because I think this is one of the biggest challenges in the digital domain in the next years and decades, is exactly establishing these standards internationally. Now, when you think about the international community, especially, for example, our transatlantic partners in the US, where do you see the international level going on cybersecurity? Are you optimistic that through diplomatic tools, through multinational fora, that the world is going to raise its game and it's going to be a race to the top rather than a race to the bottom when it comes to cybersecurity?
At some point it needs to be regulated, because right now it is not regulated. And as everybody can understand, the biggest problem in cybersecurity when it comes to national security is attribution. You cannot know who is attacking you at any given moment. Attacks are going on at any given moment from everybody to everybody on the planet, and you can never be certain. So adding this spyware and all other tools of cyber warfare, it is not regulated, and it needs to be regulated. And I see the international involvement moving to that direction, slowly but steadily. At some point it will get regulated. However, at the end of the day, it will remain a national security issue that for the moment also in Europe it is not a power given to Brussels. Yet, at least. Therefore, it will remain a national security issue to be regulated by capitals. But at some point, in the very same way that we have agreed on normal, so to say, warfare, the traditional thing that humans fought for the past 3,000 years, and we have agreed today on certain rules applying to that warfare, we need to devise new rules to apply to cyber warfare. And this needs to happen at some time in the near future. The sooner the better.
You're absolutely right. One of the biggest problems we've had is about attribution. You can suspect that, let's say, Chinese or Russians are behind a certain operation, even if there are snippets of information which hint at this, but it's very difficult to prove the direct link between state intent and the actual effect. And by the way, this is also interesting for NATO, by the way.
And also from the West. I have to add attacks from the West, because we have had attacks from the West to third countries, and even they could not be attributed. So it's not only the countries you mentioned, it's everybody attacking everybody and nobody getting credit, in a way, for what that country has done.
And this is also touches even about our collective security through NATO, by the way, and the famous Article 5 on collective defense. And it's a discussion within the defense community. Can we activate Article 5 if there's a large-scale cyber attack against one member, and how can we actually follow up and help on this one? Now, I really like your point about the right to individual cybersecurity, and hopefully we'll be getting there. But now, in closing of our conversation, maybe I just want to scale down from the macro perspective to the micro perspective, and bring you back to your academic life and your interaction with students, because this is extremely interesting for me. How are they responding to all these topics about regulation, about legislation, about all these complex supranational rules? How are they responding, and are they optimistic, or they think that there's something wrong with our approach?
Understandably, within a law school, a law faculty, it's business as usual, of course, because it is new rules and regulations and lawyers like them, so it's good business. However, to reply to your question, with skepticism, because the law as such, as an idea, as a tool of regulating human behavior, is being attacked these days. We think that there may be other alternatives, or there may be other tools of regulation. I do not agree to that mentality. However, it is out there, and in some cases it is dominant, in more technology-driven cases. And again, the role of the law is being questioned, to say the least, within faculties of law, but also within faculties of engineering, information technology, management, from many angles. We think that maybe there is another way or a better way, or again, I am not agree with these approaches. However, unavoidably they are reflected also in the approach of students who wish to see the whole picture also in class, and wish to be provided with a full idea and range of alternatives. So we have law, we have soft law, we have many centers of production of regulations, we have the machine, artificial intelligence. So they need and deserve to be given the full picture. And then they can decide for themselves.
This has been the voice of Vagelis Papakonstantinou. Thank you very much for joining us, Professor of Law in the Free University in Brussels.
Thank you very much.
Dear audience, thanks for tuning in and see you soon.
That was today's episode of Brussels Bytes. Follow us on SoundCloud for more.